Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Joanna Bucknell and you're listening to episode 12 of TAIT, that's TAIT, which is short for Talking About Immersive Theatre. Now, this episode marks TAIT's first year anniversary, which is very exciting. And over the last year, I've been getting out and about, chatting with all kinds of immersive theatre folk, and I've had the pleasure of visiting lots of different immersive sites and venues. So, without further ado, I will let you get your teeth into this very special birthday episode. Please enjoy. So I'm here in the vaults in London with Becky Brown, Oscar Blustin from Specifiq. Is it Specifiq or Specifiq?
Nope, Specifiq.
Specifiq,
yep.
Excellent.
Can I not be Specifiq?
No.
We reserve that for our continental work.
Yeah, you should do. And Dean Rogers as
Hello.
well. Hello. So hi everybody, and thank you for being here. So Becky and Oscar, can I just start with you guys? So Specifiq was founded in 2011. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Good.
Correct.
Yeah.
And since then you've made a range of different type of work. But can you tell us a little bit about what kind of makes you unique and how you sort of came about, really, as a company?
Yeah, sure. I think the company started originally as a way of telling true stories in the places where those stories originally happened. Mm-hmm. So we were fascinated by the history of buildings. I think especially I spent a lot of time working in the States before sort of coming back to the UK full time, and there just isn't over there the same history in buildings and places and sort of streets, especially living somewhere like London where the pavement's been around for hundreds of years.
We kind of take it for granted here, don't we? Because it's just all around us, everywhere you go, even in villages. It's kind of, you've got buildings that are 300-400 years old.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that taking it for granted thing was really the first incentive. I think I was wandering around my university and just thinking, watching sort of us all wander past these amazing buildings and no one looking up, no one kind of acknowledging or thinking about how long things have been around for. So we came up with a way of telling stories that would introduce audiences to the building itself and use that building as a character within any story that we'd tell. So a lot of the stuff was originally history-based and was focused on bringing these sort of stories from history to life.
Okay, great. And how did you two kind of meet? How did you sort of come together?
So we both worked for Theatre Delicatessen at their wonderful Marylebone Gardens on Marylebone High Street. We met actually at something that has now the predecessor to the Gunpowder Plot. So we're having what I called creative chitty chatty. Yes, I'm sticking that in there. We were having one of those, and Oscar just happened to come in to discuss a project that he was working on, and from that we worked on Heist together. And he hired me to do Giants of Old at Harrow School, and hasn't been able to get rid of me since then, pretty much.
That is exactly how it
Excellent. So Dean, you've worked as a co-director, producer, designer on projects such as The Crystal Maze, Time Run and Heist. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that there is
overlap there.
And you went to Trinity College and Central as well, is kind of your background. Can you tell us how you came to this sort of route to be involved in kind of immersive work?
So I was making theatre in Dublin with I was making lots of different kind of stuff with no specific sort of angle on things. Just trying lots of different plays in lots of different ways. And I sort of came over here to do the Masters at Central with a view to finding out what, as an artist, did I want to say, what kind of work did I want to make. And immediately, as soon as I came over here, I became fascinated by immersive work. I thought it was just the absolute route forward for theatre. A lot of my work in Dublin and a lot of my writing in university was about Auguste Boal, and so I find interaction and I find audiences playing the most interesting things in theatre. Yeah. So very quickly over my master's year, I saw lots of great immersive shows. I think one that inspired me quite a lot was a show by a company called Half Cut, which was called Shelf Life, and you went through the audience member went through a whole life in the course of the show. So you started as a sperm in a giant, going through a giant vagina, and you finished it being euthanized in an old care home. So shows like that really made me feel like this is what theatre should be. The audience should be playing on their feet, engaged. From there, I worked with a company called Difference Engine to create Heist, which the guys spoke about. So that was we took over the Marylebone Gardens building that these guys mentioned, and we got the audience to commit a robbery. And That was just the most fun, and like I still today one of the most interesting shows I've ever worked on, and that kind of got a lot of attention and opened a lot of doors for me. And from there I went to work on Time Run, which is a hyperreal adventure game, I believe is. I think it's meant to be like a next level escape the room game, but with like characters and a story and stuff like that. And I got very interested in gameplay and very interested in escape games. So now the work I make is sort of an immersive theatre live game hybrid, as is evidenced by, like, say, for example, the Crystal Maze, which is a huge immersive experience. I'm pretty sure none of the audience who walk through our doors ever call it theatre, but it is useful to have that in the back of our heads.
Well, I'm going to bring us back to some of these projects that you've mentioned now to talk about in a little while, and I'm also going to bring us back to talk about that kind of term immersive as well, because I've kind of done that with everyone, and it's in some ways a really liberating term and a really problematic one, so I'll bring us back to that. So I'm a little bit interested in the fact that you got involved once you came over to London. So would you say that kind of immersive scene isn't really happening at the moment in sort of Ireland and in Dublin, or is it very London-centric still?
I think it's still very London-centric. I mean, I still go over to Dublin quite a lot, and the theatre scene in Dublin is very active, but there's no one is still to this day really doing anything like what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating, because it's 40 minutes away. So it's very strange that stuff isn't happening there, that hasn't caught on there. I think it's to do with a lot of things. I very boringly, I think it's a lot to do with economics.
Yes. I agree, and space as well to some respects. And what you guys think about this as well in terms of talking about space and the different contexts you've worked in. I've had lots of questions recently from people kind of emailing me from the United States, asking for reading about this because they don't really have any access to that, but also asking about what's going on continental Europe. Is it just London? And I get these kind of questions all the time, and I wondered what your perspective kind of was on, is this really a London thing because that's where the money is, because that's where the space is, or is it starting to bubble up in different forms elsewhere?
I think it is going. I think for me things are still, I mean, of course, like year by year it gets less so, but it feels to me that immersive work is still fairly embryonic in the States. There are plenty of sort of small scale, really lovely small scale experiences springing up around the place. And then there are the sort of beer muff like shows like Sleep No More and
absolutely,
and other bits and pieces, Third Rail, the Alice in Wonderland, Then She Fell.
Yes,
which
I
is,
went to see that in New York. I loved that show.
It's just beautiful. So there are a couple of kind of standout things, and then there have been other things like Queen of the Night over there, which was similar. I think had some producers in common with Sleep No More that have run, well and busily for a while, but not really kind of taken root.
Well, in New York, from some of the people that I've spoken to, it seems to be coming out of a slightly different space over there, and there seems to be a lot of cabaret, and it seems to be coming out of that cabaret nightclub scene rather than kind of coming out of the sort of theatre scene,
absolutely.
Which is what's happening here. And some of the things I've heard about on the continent seem to be coming out of that much more live art, performance art space, and are driven by kind of slightly different sort of intentions and agendas. So, but I think London is still very much the home of kind of immersive theatre.
And a lot of that has to do with quite dull things like zoning laws in the States and other things that just make it so hard to get into a space and repurpose it for performance. Whereas
and union laws as well are much stricter in the States.
And context as well, because I'm based in Portsmouth, which isn't that far away. It's like 70 miles away. But the willingness to let people use spaces like this, to let people co-opt spaces for short periods of time to do this kind of work just isn't the same as I think it is here.
I think it's growing. One of the guys that's working on this show with us, Martin Coate, he has a friend of his has just opened a new venue that's doing this style work in Bristol, and it's very exciting and kind of, but again, it is driven more from a cabaret sense because all of it has to have live music and kind of that kind of club night, but it's the kind of pushing the boundaries of theatre into that and making it take over and story being the centre of everything, which is what's very exciting about the kind of work that we're pushing, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing that a lot of our work now sort of has in common is this idea of putting the audience at the centre of a story. And I think that weirdly will sort of drive everything else. And I think that hasn't yet taken root in the States. But I think weirdly that if that comes first, then a lot of other things sort of can fit into place in places like London and now, thankfully, regionally as well.
And there's some great contexts, that are popping up. I mean, the Vaults has always kind of given this sort of access to kind of non-traditional theatre spaces, and BAC as well are doing that, and there are other spaces around London. And I think until those sorts of spaces start popping up And we're very fortunate in the UK because we have that kind of funding subsidy context here, which I don't think necessarily is the case elsewhere. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Oscar made a point there about putting the audience at the centre of the work, and I would say, I'll just echo that that's the thing I find to be unique about the immersive theatre here. Yeah. And I think that is very much the aspect of it that we're trying to push in this next phase of immersive theatre's life, following Punch Drunk. And I think that's taking a lot of cues from gameplay and stuff like that. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that takes hold and how audiences react to that, because it's certainly been the experience in our work that is the thing that draws people to it. And I haven't seen that anywhere else, and I haven't seen that spread anywhere else.
I think the Arts Council and sort of funding thing is so crucial to letting artists put an audience at the centre of a thing, and I think one of the reasons again why America is a couple of years behind is that there's so much more commercial emphasis, and if you do put an audience at the centre, it becomes immediately harder to make anything, make any kind of money out of anything.
I mean, there are still those pressures here. I mean, we're the same. We make one-on-one work, which becomes unfeasible to put in any kind of theatre space, so we always have to be aside something else or in that other cupboard or toilets or other space that they can kind of still make money with the bums on seats, and that is a big difficulty as well. I think even here in the subsidised sort of sector, it's still difficult to get producers to persuade them that that's kind of viable moving forward, so we're always under pressure to upscale.
We are in a struggling public sector now.
Yeah,
at the
of
moment.
course. Of course we are.
It's it's not all rosy. I worry that this said public sector will be gutted in the successive Tory governments we're about to have. And
I think what it's done is, I mean, I work across the sector and of course in HE, and I'm finding that more and more there has to be that symbiotic relationship between HE and between the cultural industries because of that gradual kind of erosion now of those sort of public funds and the subsidy that's coming. And I think HE is quite open to sort of helping to support and nourish some of that. And I know we've opened up our spaces when we're not in there to other people, so they can come and develop work and that sort of thing. So I think, again, we have that really close relationship with practice in our HE environment, which again doesn't happen outside of the UK necessarily either. So I think there's all these kind of pressures that sort of bring to bear on that. Let me bring you back to talk about some of your previous work. I know you mentioned lots of it earlier, but I'm going to kind of start to pick on some of those bits. So Specifiq's early work, as you said earlier, seems very much to be rooted in that sort of site-specific kind of approach to place and site and space and giving sort of inside access to those histories and to those stories. Can you talk a little bit about some of that early work? So the Black Staircase, for example, that you did at Durham Castle, or Giants of Old that you did at Harrow. Can you talk a little bit more about those projects and what they were like and what they involved?
The Durham one was a total sort of baptism of fire, and there was at the time a wonderful heritage site coordinator who was looking after the sort of UNESCO site up there, who was incredibly forward-thinking and was looking to find a way of letting university students gain professional experience and also find a sort of dynamic way of getting the public in to view the site that was otherwise basically out of bounds. And he gave us our first commission, which was it was at Halloween time, and so it was always going to be a slightly darker piece. Unfortunately, the history of Durham Castle is checkered, to say the least.
Absolutely.
And so we found a whole load of completely true ghost stories. Which there were sort of various accounts in the archives of Durham Castle, which we took from and led our audience on a multi-stranded sort of romp around the building. I think we used 24 spaces, and at its sort of broadest, the show had 8 simultaneous scenes running in different rooms. The audience were guided; they weren't free roaming, which is something that we've sort of mixed and matched with throughout. I think all of our work is at points free roaming, at points led or guided. But it was sort of a choice-based promenade thing, where you sort of picked a character to stick with at certain times, and you could mix and match between storylines. And there were 3 interweaving time periods. There was a sort of a modern time period, I think a 46 time period, and an 1812 time period, and each of these storylines sort of wove through and really filled the space. There were some lovely little sort of magic tricks and things, which I think in a building as rigid and as sort of stony as Durham Castle is, it was such a fun way of making really drawing our attention to the physical surroundings, which I think.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because there are challenges, aren't there, that come with working with sites like that, because you
Yep.
you can't drill or fix or do any of those things. So how have you kind of managed sort of working around sort of being sympathetic to those sites, but also trying to sort of maintain that immersed space?
I think I'd say it sort of breaks down into two sides. There's the design side, where like yes, you can't do anything to anything basically, and it becomes mainly about like very careful positioning of people and sort of trying to, at all points, encourage people to face away from the ugly bits,
strategic lighting.
Strategic
Battery,
shadow probably.
Battery lighting.
But then the second thing is just the practicalities of running a show in a space like that. So we spend, so much of our practice, I think I probably speak on behalf of all of us, is about like radios, just using radios to navigate a space. And for me, the thing that none of us talk enough about is the role of the show caller in immersive theatre, which is very different from a stage manager in traditional theatre. That it requires a sort of a three-dimensional skill set in a way that I don't think many other types of theatre sort of require. But to be able to be on top of multiple audiences moving simultaneously through different spaces and coordinate that movement is something that is increasingly a skill set that we all rely on.
But it's also the other dimension of the show caller role, which is, I think, increasingly fascinating. The work we make is the artistic choices they often end up having to make, because they sort of become a quasi stage manager, live director.
Absolutely.
A little bit. It's the most comparable thing is like a showrunner on a live TV show or something like that.
And it's interesting because when I was talking to Les Enfants, and they're the first people I spoke to, they said that Alice every room was absolutely timed, and if it was wrong, the room just carried on, regardless, and just pushed forward. So all the lighting, all of the sound cues, everything was on a fixed timer, and
we try and avoid
we try and
avoid fixing things. I mean, it depends on the show. We did all just work on a show where everything was timed like that.
Everything was timed like that for the Crystal Maze.
And everything was timed like that for the Resident Evil project that we all just worked on as well. But in general, for our work, we also don't use QLab and things because we're in a site where we're not installing lots of lights, and we're working with limitations in that front. So Giants of Old was me running around with a rucksack from room to room, checking that things were ready and preset in the 3 different buildings we were using across the site. It gets... I find, because of the work that we make and being driven with the audience, having agency and all that kind of stuff, as soon as you put it on a timed QLab, it can't be that style of work, because you never know what an audience is going to do.
Exactly.
And I'm sure you're going to get onto Heist in a minute, but I mean, by the end of that one, we had something like 23 different endings.
Yeah, I mean, I change the number every time I say this.
Yeah, me too.
But it was certainly lots. I think we are as far as ending Q. So what's Q in the alphabet?
It must be.
It's less,
17, 18.
Yeah,
that's
right.
that.
My maths is not that good.
Which we wouldn't have been able to do if everything was set to a queue and timed in that kind of sense.
Exactly.
Because you just need to be flexible and able to think on your feet and adapt to the audience's needs.
And in my experience, tech is always the first thing that lets you down. So I would feel terrified relying kind of on tech in that kind of way, and we're the same. Our work is, you have to respond to the people that you've got in that space, and if you give them that agency, I think you need to be flexible and to be able to respond to that. But it is a huge logistical challenge, and I think a lot of this work is becoming a lot more about thinking about mechanics, thinking about logistics of how you maneuver people safely as well around those spaces, but also how you maneuver people in a way that doesn't break that fictive world you've set up for them.
We just actually finished a project working with some students at Bath University that had originally, I think we assumed that we'd have, one more room than we ended up having. And the consequence of losing that room was that the kind of 2-minute fail-safe that we'd built into the beginning and end of each scene was basically eliminated.
8 seconds once.
And so we ended up clearing a room out of one door, I think 8 seconds before a full audience needed to come in through another, which is just the hairy moments. But actually, to be honest, that's the most fun thing about running a show like that is when it does feel like an oiled machine, like the building is just living and things are perfectly on time as they sort of move around.
Well, it's that liveness, isn't it, I think, that people crave as well, is that really feeling visceral and in the moment, living through that moment. I think for me as an audience, that's what excites me, those moments when I get to make choices and I really feel like I'm living it, and I find that exciting. So you all worked on Heist. Do you want to tell me about that piece of work and then how it kind of brought you guys sort of together? I'm assuming it did here.
I mean, it certainly did. So Heist was a concept that myself and a company called Difference Engine came up with, and effectively what happened with that show is we wanted to make a very small scale, very reduced experimental show where the audience stole something, and we took this to Theatre Delicatessen, and they were like, "We're being kicked out of our building in 2 months. Do you want to just have the building to do it?" And we were like, "Yeah." So instantly it scaled up quite a bit, and then tickets went on sale. And they sold out instantly.
I know, I couldn't get one.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So, and all of a sudden, this very experimental show that we were kind of just making to see if it worked, suddenly had huge stakes. Suddenly there were lots of press coming, and they were sold out, and we were not ready. Enter Becky. And Becky fixed everything and made the show work. And that's how it ended up working on in time for opening night. That building, which was supposed to stop after 2 months, we ended up keeping for a subsequent 9 months. And we ran the show in there day in, day out. Oscar was running the building at the time.
Yeah, it's actually worth just saying that so much of what we do and the fact that we know each other is actually down to Theatre Delicatessen. And more or less all of the companies that are involved with Beneath, the project we're currently working on, we're all more or less, apart from I think one, are all in the same room because of Theatre Delicatessen and because of their wonderful kind of umbrellaing of and championing of companies producing this sort of non-traditional work. So I think we all owe a huge amount to them and their buildings, of which there are more, thankfully, springing up around the place now.
And I'm finding this more and more, actually, with the more and more people I talk to, there are little pockets of either HE institutions or specific venues or specific kind of production that have sort of these things are bubbling out of, which I think is really interesting. So last year, am I right, is that the first time you started to work with the Vaults Festival? And you did a piece for the audience that were waiting. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Because that seems to be a little bit of a shift when things really shifted away from potentially that kind of historical site work that you were doing and into kind of something slightly different. So can you tell me sort of how you got there and what that shift sort of meant for you guys?
I think with every theatre company, you reach a point where you realise that the expensive thing are the actors. And it seems sort of wise to try and come up with some format of storytelling that doesn't involve them.
Yes.
We've been doing a lot of work and spending a lot of time with Difference Engine, who we've all talked about, who have a real emphasis on the tech side of things, and have incredible skill sets sort of down that avenue. We are slightly more limited than them in our technical capabilities, but certainly enjoy that side of things, and I've spent a lot of time over the last sort of 10 years trying to get better at things like graphic and web design, and as a result of this project, some other more sort of audio and programming technical skills. And so Hearing Things, which was a project that we devised for last year's Vault Festival, was rooted in a sort of core thing about telling stories based in spaces. And we wanted to create something that, while people were waiting for shows, or we were waiting in the bar and queuing and generally sort of loitering at the festival, we thought it would be fun to find an opportunity to tell some of the stories of the physical space that they were in. So we commissioned, I think, 8 writers to just write sort of micro stories that were set in either in the vaults or around Waterloo, and recorded them and created basically a fairly simple interface that people could just sort of plug in, access through their own phones.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't need any kit, and then play a 30-second story that hopefully drew your attention to something that you hadn't noticed around the space.
So in a way, it's kind of driven by the same things that drove that kind of site. It's that kind of look about you. In that, I did a DIY thing with Lada. Quite a few years ago now, it must have been back in 2010, when I spent a weekend with the girls from Breathe Artists, and they did this whole thing about look up, and the fact that people never look up at these old buildings, and that just kind of really stuck with me, and it kind of seems to resonate through all of this work, and it really is kind of, even though we're generating these kind of fictive spaces for people, actually it's often about reframing and revisiting and re-noticing, isn't it, those sites and spaces.
Did you do the thing that Museum of London, the audio tour that they made last year? It was amazing, which was the exact same thing with two people going on separate but joint journeys. It's just an audio experience, but took you walking through London and was very much about getting you to look up and notice the other person and notice the places around you, which is quite exciting also that the Museum of London commissioned that.
It's amazing, because we spend so much of our time now looking down, even more so I think with kind of our screen culture, it's just constantly looking down, so it's nice sometimes just to get the chance to look up and look around and take a breath. So you kind of come from quite a theatrical background, and so do you in some respects, but a lot of the work that you've done is much more based in this kind of performance game, and I think there's a lot more of this sort of cropping up now. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about some of the past work that you've done in terms of that more performance game, escape room sort of based, and how that sort of brings and informs what you're doing.
Yeah, so, I mean, effectively, if we go off just what Oscar was saying there about the actors being the most important thing, I very much see escape games as the answer to that problem.
Absolutely.
Because to me, an escape game is just an immersive experience where I've gone, no actors in this one. My work is always about the audience as a player, as the protagonist.
Yeah.
And a lot of my personal interests come from video games and board games, and a lot of my practice comes from actually my experiences playing tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of world I try to create for my audience, and I think you can create that world with actors, with a story, or you can create it with a set and with games and stuff like that, and I kind of use them both interchangeably. I don't think there's as hard a distinction between theatre and games as the rest of the world likes to think there is.
I agree.
I've had a lot of people go to some of my experiences going, but that wasn't theatre, and saying other things are definitely theatre, and I don't know how other people draw such a hard line when I don't.
I agree. I think performance as well is a useful way of bridging. I went to a conference last year at Exeter, and actually there were lots of PhD students there who are doing exactly that, involved. They're coming directly from the gaming. They've got their undergraduates and everything in game design and coding and all of that, but they're coming to this kind of live space and bringing those skills that they have with them. And I think that's really interesting. People gave some extremely interesting papers, and I thought, I really need to increase my knowledges of that kind of thing, because our work is the same. We use games and rules and tasks, but it's that kind of non-tech sort of reliance on mechanic and the way that rules and tasks operate to engage somebody in an actual act of doing something. And I think technology is going to open up. But at the moment, we've got a lot of pressure in HE with this kind of joy of use VR. And we're like, okay, but you need to give us some space to play, some space to think about how we can integrate that in a meaningful way in our practice, because just the tech on its own isn't just exciting, it's what we might think to do with it or creatively do with it. But it's having to gain all those new skill sets, isn't it? And exactly like you're saying, of training to learn how to deal with all these technologies and use them, because until you're kind of fluent in that language, it's really hard to then apply it, I think. So I know you've got to rush off in a minute, so I just wanted to kind of ask you, so we are here at the Vaults and you've got the Neath opening tonight. Now, I know this is always a nightmare, isn't it, with this kind of work, because you want to talk about it, but you can't say too much because you don't want to give too much away. But by the time this goes out, I think everything will be over, so you don't have to worry too much, unless, of course, you're hoping to extend. That's always the worry, isn't it? So tell us as much as you can about the Neath and what your kind of hopes are for tonight and what you've done to work towards tonight.
So the Neath was born out of me realising that the Vaults Festival deadline for applications was 24 hours from when I was looking at my screen, and we had been talking about an entirely different project, and we basically pitched the idea of doing sort of like an immersive showcase with lots of different companies.
Yeah.
At the time of pitching, we didn't have a theme, we didn't really know what it is. And sort of over the devising process of the last few months, we've arrived at this idea of it being like a bar for supernatural creatures, and the landlord is the devil himself. And that's sort of the core idea, the core prompt that we gave the companies to then work with. So companies like Difference Engine, like Lab Collective, who were also in Marylebone Gardens with us, Martin Coate, who Becky mentioned, Sarah Morris, who works with Apocalypse Events, and a director called Deirdre McLaughlin, who I worked with in Central. I've all gone off and created lots of different small immersive interactions that we've then fitted together with a larger narrative. Can you talk a bit more about?
Yes.
Have I said all the things?
I think so. Again, we've put the audience at the centre of the show. It's slightly more game-based, actually, than some of our other stuff. The storyline is probably I'd say we probably meet halfway. I think we, yes, the thing is sort of shaped around, how can I say this without being too irritatingly cryptic, and also just...
I mean, if it goes out after the...
Yeah, but they're seeing the show tonight.
Yeah, we are
really
coming
aware of.
tonight.
Oh, sorry.
There's a
Yeah, things in there. La, 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 la.
There's so there's a bar.
Surely that's enough to keep you...
There's a bar, and there's a challenge you are being issued. So the whole show hinges on this challenge that is set to you by the devil character.
Well, that is enough for me. That's always an exciting enough proposition to get me to come along. So, and of course, I've seen the bare bones when I come to find you, so that's quite exciting. Now, Dean and Oscar, you have to leave us, don't you? Because you need to go and actually get everything ready for tonight. But can I spend a bit more time with you, Becky? That's great. So thank you so much for taking the time, and I'll probably see you again much later on.
Yeah, like 4 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll see us very
So thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Yeah. So one of the things we've been talking about is the joy of that is the fact that people have that kind of agency in that space and you're kind of giving them those choices. But are there any times, I always ask everyone this, do you have kind of horror stories? Are there times when people have behaved in really errant ways that have surprised you or challenged you?
Oh, absolutely. So my background predominantly is in stage management, somehow magically stumbled across that, and then came into show calling. And so Heist was my first immersive experience. I hadn't even been to an immersive experience before I did Heist.
That's like baptism by fire.
Yeah, it very much was so. And so along the way I've kind of I've seen everything. So in Heist, we had these guard characters who were walking around, and obviously we've created such an amazing world that people did things that you're like, you're in a show, what are you thinking? So there was once a chap who, there were some bricks lying around as part of the set decoration, and he thought it'd be in the world he could pick up the brick and hold that as a weapon against a guard character, which luckily we work with interactive performers who are trained and aware of this, and the performer managed to talk him down and get out of that, and then immediately we do another health and safety walk around and get rid of anything that could potentially be like that, which is something that now I know about, and every single show that I go into, you look around for elements like that, and you think about, okay, when are we antagonizing people in a way that helps the storyline, and when do we need to be cautious about doing it because it could lead to potential risks and stuff. Well, the funniest one was definitely some people who decide they smashed one of the call points with the fire alarm system at Marylebone during Heist, and they were just like, oh, we were trying to distract the guards. You're like, but you're in a real world, this is a real thing.
Yeah, this really means something.
So then you just, you build into your thing at the beginning that this is a real space. All the emergency protocols are real. And that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that's the paradox that happens, isn't it, in this space? Because you are really there, you're really living it, even though you are taking up and agreeing to participate in this kind of fiction as well. But there is always that
tricky, it's just such a blurred line.
And we have to sit in that liminal space, because that's how those things happen. That's how that transformational possibility of being able to sort of shift perspective and shift character happens. But it also then exactly causes problems with that as well, those kind of real world things of, well, I'm in a transitional space where the normal rules don't apply, but do all the normal rules not apply? And so there's you have to constantly negotiate that paradox as an audience member, I think.
Yeah. And it just, people, when they get into this kind of, because we give them agency, they take on that in all its form.
You give them permission, absolutely.
So, and it's just about, we work with amazing performers who manage to figure out, they're just so great. Like Neil, who you'll see this evening, playing the devil. He was the lead, lead is not the right word because they were all the same level characters, but he was the ringleader of the Heist experience, and they just very quickly walk in a room and he can read how a person's going to behave and be able to turn to them and bring them down or build them up or whatever you need to do. And it's, as I'm sure you're aware in your own work, it's so important for an immersive performer, interactive performer, whatever you want to say, to be able to read people and to understand that.
Well, it's a huge challenge because it's fine when we're working with our work, but when I'm teaching students, second year undergraduate students, trying to give them those skills is actually very difficult because a lot of it comes with experience.
Definitely
life experience. And having a sense of a certain kind of charisma to be able to operate within those spaces. And I haven't yet found the best way of being able to sort of
train people to
do that. But it's such in its infancy, and I think there's about to be a special issue journal.
Oh, really?
About training immersive performance. I'm really looking forward to that coming out, because I'd love to see what other people's strategies have been for kind of engaging in that.
Because so the Specifiq's work, that the kind that Oscar was talking about earlier, the kind of multi-stranded promenade stuff, that you can easily teach people how to be physical in a space, how audience react when you walk towards them, to get to usher them without looking like you're ushering and all of that kind of thing. That's easy. It's the when you're actually speaking to them and interacting. Yeah, that's a really interesting one.
And it depends on the permission you offer as well, because some of the work, especially immersive theatre work, tends to be within that fictive space. So often the stories are starting points and familiar to the audience as well, like Alice. We all know Alice. We all know the Shakespeare stories that kind of create these starting spaces, and sometimes they're historical sites, so we know a little bit about kind of the context that comes from that. We make live artwork, and so we offer an even more dangerous space, because like you're you and I'm me, and this is the real world, but we're going to do this at this moment in this time. So then trying to negotiate how anyone might behave in that space is almost impossible. So I'm seasoned, I'm used to doing it, but then teaching that to my students, it's just a case of they just have to play and have a go in a safe environment where it's an educational environment where they can sort of fail at doing that. But I don't have good...
Yeah, I was just thinking about that from because even from a stage management point of view, so I'm really big on, at the moment, starting an education branch in Specifiq, and starting to teach stage managers. And so all of our projects that we've been doing, we've been bringing on a student to have that experience with us. So, like for Mystery at the Museum, the project we did at the National Maritime Museum for Halloween last year, it was a baptism of fire. I prepped them as much as you can.
Of course.
But when you have 180 people who have done some shots of rum in the bar before coming into the National Maritime Museum, it's free roaming across the entire space. There's only so much you can inform them, and you just have to find the right people, give them the feel of that they have the power in the situation.
Yeah, it's a different agency, isn't it, to what the audience get? But it is an agency, kind of being able to operate within that space with kind of confidence and knowing that you can manage.
And also the key thing that I think is very difficult, I'm speaking about stage management because again that's my background, but like the energy of a stage manager, a good stage manager is normally very driven and very like focused, and when they walk through a space on a mission, they're walking through a space on the mission. And I do an exercise with stage managers that's very dancey kind of stuff, where we play with, okay, let's look at how you're standing now in the space. You've got your weight's really square, you've got it all like that. Let's look at relaxing onto one leg, because your energy in the space is to be entirely different, because people will view you differently. We want to see you as a wall. You're a position of authority, but you're part of the environment
as well. Isn't it? There's a lot of trust that comes because people are relying on you for things to be and to happen at times when you need to.
And also to not stick out like a sore thumb. That's the thing.
I'm really interested if you can explain to the listeners a little bit more about what it means to call a show, because no one has actually spoken to me about this before, and I think it's a really interesting side that's not really talked about a great deal. So what does it mean to call an immersive show?
It really depends on the piece. So the key thing so I work with Difference Engine all the time, and they normally set me up with CCTV. I also had CCTV at the Crystal Maze.
Great.
And I do a lot of radio juggling, so it's really important for me on as many projects as possible to have performers on radio, because they're quite often in spaces with audience in a situation where if anything goes wrong, they need to know what's happening, or if timings are changing, like I said on Heist, who knew what was going to happen, I could communicate with them, okay, we're going with, ending Z or whatever. But so it's all, let's see, which is the easiest show to start with? I'll just do the Crystal Maze, because that's kind of the most basic one. So we have a radio with performers, a radio with front of house, and a radio with all the backstage crew, and it's just about watching what audience are doing on space, doing time checks and letting people know when we're about to move spaces. I've set up a system, which I now use on all of the shows that I work on, of radio calls and dealing with, so we have a whole system of code names and code words for when we're dealing with people who are potential dickheads. That's my very academic way to say that.
Absolutely.
So I actually train people now that when I say there's Johnsons in the house, they know that their energy has to be different, and they know to keep an eye on them with their stage management, etc. We use igloos and stuff for injuries, and we have code names for when people are being aggressive and all of that.
It's
kind
pretty
of
much
stuff.
military. It's like a military.
It's absolutely
operation.
like that. And I love it. The more radios I have in front of me and the more CCTVs I have in front of me, the happier I am, because I love chaos and I like getting to control the chaos. The Resident Evil thing that we just did was ridiculous, and we had 7 active audiences at a time.
Well, people are in fear as well, and when people are in fear, they behave
ridiculously.
That
one was controlled like the Q Lab, like Alice, though. So that was escape the room game meets interactive performance.
Yeah.
And every single room they couldn't leave until the 8-minute window happened.
Okay.
But then you also had to get them to leave in that after that 8-minute window because there was a 2-minute reset before the next
one.
Absolutely. Which is was very stressful at points.
Because that's the other thing, isn't it? You've got to maneuver people without breaking the spell
world.
That you've created, kind of holding up that world, but at the same time holding up that world is actually a logistical task.
Very logistical, and lots of timings. I think it's always all about flowcharts, and it's always knowing exactly where we are in time and thinking about it. You don't have a script, which I think is the biggest difference between show calling and stage management, is that stage manager at DSM sitting there has a book, knows exactly every single day, I'm going to say go at this time. That is absolutely gone.
We have boxes and arrows for all our lives and times.
It's all about hitting the key times, or some days somebody will decide to do a key line 20 minutes earlier than they're supposed to, and so you have the ripple effect of that you have have to figure out, and you're like, all right, fine, we got this. It'll all be fine. God. Definitely. We're just recording, but that looks beautiful.
That's fine, that's lovely.
Sorry, just getting some props delivered.
Where do you want it all?
Shed, please.
So excited.
Get some food. Yeah. Thanks, Ed, you're a rock star.
Food and water.
Yeah.
So this term, I ask everybody about this, immersive. It's been kind of attached to an awful lot of things and covers a whole lot of ground and sort of tells us nothing at all. And I kind of wondered how you, especially beginning on sort of very site-based work and site-specific and that kind of promenade, how you feel about that term and how you feel it relates to your work.
I don't think we're kind of moving away from using it. We are doing, we're starting to use interactive more, which even that is already feeling tainted. Immersive just feels like a word that you have to put on stuff to sell tickets.
It's very much become a producer's
a producer's tool, a marketing tool, nothing. It doesn't have any weight or sense to it because... I mean,
even in academia, it's still kind of seen as a cool thing, so that's why we're kind of holding on to it,
but it doesn't...
It doesn't really...
It doesn't mean anything. The gunpowder plot, we are going to have a discussion about this at some point because we're really interested in... We all make something that we put under this umbrella of immersive, interactive, but all of our work is so incredibly different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, well...
Everyone I've spoken to, everyone so far, I mean, this will be the 12th episode next month, so I'll have spoken to 12 different people. And every single one I've spoken to is completely different. They've come from completely different training backgrounds, completely different approaches and perspectives, but all resting
under this
publicity, effectively title of immersive. And so I kind of, I feel it's awkward and I find it really problematic. And I think in academia it's still really kind of the dominant term, and for me that's a massive problem.
I agree, and then it just comes down to we, the makers, now need to figure out what the next word is and make that the thing. But
it's what audiences want. And that's the thing, isn't it? You need to connect with the correct audience. And at the moment, that word
is the one that sells tickets.
Is the one that tells them that they want to come see that. Well, again, all the language is so problematic. I find myself saying, I'm going to see a show. I'm not going to see a show. I never go and see a show anymore. I go and play.
But you're going to come drink in a bar.
We don't have the language and the terminology quite yet to be able to kind of talk about this in the vernacular, just to say we're not going to see a show, we don't even make shows, we're doing something else, and immersive doesn't really help us with explaining or describing that in any way. But audiences connect with it, so at the moment I suspect it's
audiences sometimes don't even connect with it. The Time Out blog that went out, which is absolutely lovely and wonderful, every single comment on it that we got on Facebook and stuff is all about the bar bit. And it's nothing, just depends on your audience. I mean, they don't know what the term immersive means either, so they're just excited about the idea of a bar run by the devil. They have no idea what they're coming to. Yeah. We're going to see how they react to what we're presenting them, because it has quite a lot of theatrical elements. But yeah, it's such a buzzword.
And the rules are still being negotiated, because some shows you'll see that like, don't drink, don't take drugs before you come, otherwise you won't be admitted. But then others are centred around bars and things as well. And I think the moment people have had a drink as well, then it even further complicates those things. I mean, of course, for some people, what that does is it just means they can have a good time and they can kind of let go a little bit more than they normally would, which is great. But for other people, it can go too far as well. And I've been at shows where people have been ridiculously inebriated, and it's been really challenging for other audience members. So I can't even imagine what it was like for the performers.
We had that in Heist. We had one lady who, because of what she'd consumed before she came to see the show, after the first scene was like, no, I'm not going, because she was so scared. But it wasn't really fear, it was just because of everything that she consumed before she arrived.
Like, absolutely.
Oh, Lord. And those were one of those audiences that you're like, they didn't know what they were coming to.
Yeah. And I think maybe you've got maybe one or two people in a group sometimes that will know and seek this kind of work out, but will just bring all their mates.
Yeah. I mean, my housemates are coming and they have no idea what they're coming to. They're like, oh, we'll be there early to help like make your bar look lively. I'm like, no, the bar is the show. Lively. That's what you're coming to.
I get it from my family that you never invite us to your shows, and I'm like, because you can't just sit in the dark for 2 hours and watch. I'm not sure. For example, my grandma will appreciate some of the things that people have to do when they come. So that's why they never get an invite. But it's not because I don't love you. It's because I just don't think it's really kind of fair.
My parents saw the Christmas at Newton Park, which we did at Bath Spa University, and that was their first ever experience of non-traditional theatre. Luckily, it was a nice, gentle baptism.
Oh, that's good, a nice, gentle
because it was a multi-stranded promenade piece. It had World War II love stories and
nice
suffragettes and all of that kind of stuff. And they absolutely loved it and were gobsmacked by it. But I can't imagine them in this world.
I mean, some of the things I've been put through, I've been drenched, spat on, hurt, injured, all of those kind of...
God,
Because that's what I do, I seek it all out. So I've been to
really sell it.
Every possible... But I love it, and it's really fun, and I keep coming back, so I don't know what that says about me. So the other thing I ask everybody about is this anxiety that I have, which is kind of really paradoxical, because as a maker, I'm only interested in that moment that happens between people who come into that space. And the whole point of that is it disappears and it's lost. But as an academic and a cultural theorist, I am terrified that in 10 years' time, there's no going to be... I mean, of course, there's some photos, big glossy photos of the big kind of companies, but outside of that, it's impossible to film in any meaningful way. You can get some still images, but do you think about documentation, or does it not really...
We actually just discussed this at the last Gunpowder plot before this one, documentation, and not even just documenting for the actual experience happening with photos and all of that kind of stuff.
But the making.
Documenting it also, but script-wise.
I know,
and that kind of...
Because we can't sell scripts. 20 years' time, you can't buy a script.
Exactly.
And what we're doing.
And and we're also discussing in the sense of making our businesses actually viable. You want to be able to write something that somebody else is then going to be able to pick up and do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
because that's how it will perpetuate in culture is by being re-performed by people and
making the amateur version of Heist where a bunch of kids can do it in their school or something ridiculous.
But that has to be the future because that's the only viable future, and it's the only way to preserve the legacy of that work as well.
But so we GoPro everything, which while rubbish quality, you do get an audience's view of an experience, which is really lovely. Obviously photos and stuff, and yet when it comes to script writing, we've gotten to the point, at least with Specifiq, when we do stuff like this, we have very detailed character briefs that we make over time. So like a character will know who they are, what their history is, what their relationship is with every other character, their like general backstory and all that kind of stuff. So technically, if this goes on for a long run somewhere, you can swap people in and out because the world
And the
is
mechanics,
explained.
of course, are
And, yeah.
carefully structured as well.
Exactly.
Same as it's all rules mechanics. So obviously we've already talked about the Neath opening tonight, and I'm very excited. I'm going to pick up my tickets when we finish talking, and then I'm rushing off to speak to another immersive practitioner, and then coming back again this evening. So it's a mad tour of the South Bank for me
Nice.
today, not this morning, the whole of today and this
Yeah.
evening. What's next for you?
So what's next? The idea is that the Neath is a proof of concept at this level, and then we find somewhere where it can go and be a longer run and explore and expand. And we've got some potential sites for that for later, possibly in the summer, and if not later in the year.
Great.
Specifiq are currently working on a workshop day, which will be running at the National Maritime in March, which is part of my
Great.
education branch.
Excellent.
Which is going to be, actually quite a few of the directors here will be leading workshops for students studying all forms of drama.
And what's the
So
best place for people to find out about that? Is it on the website?
It will be on the website by the time
Brilliant.
this podcast is broadcast.
Excellent. So if they go to the educational part of the
Yeah.
website, they'll be able to find information
Yeah, they'll be
about
under opportunities.
opportunities.
Put that in your notes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
On the podcast.
I know, but it's nice to say it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
people get to hear it.
But and it's going to be, I believe it's going to be free. And it's just literally an afternoon, one Thursday afternoon at the end, the 23rd of March.
Excellent. I'll try and send some students your way. That's their
amazing,
Easter break. So
Oh,
that's kind of
yeah.
good. And all of ours are sort of London and home counties based, our students.
It
so-
should be good. Because the dream is that from that we find some stage managers who we're looking at doing a longer run of Mystery at the Museum next year, next Halloween, or this year. Oh God, it's this year.
It's 2017
Yep,
now.
it's
I know.
Which will be happening hopefully Halloween. So then the idea is that
Great.
there are stage management students who want to come back and work with us on that, and as part of whenever they work with us, they get workshops and all kinds of other stuff kind of built into that. And what else are we working on?
Well, I'm going to bring you back.
Stuff,
You've mentioned it a couple of times, and I didn't want to say anything because
Yeah.
it's a little bit secretive, but the gunpowder plotters. Do you
gunpowder
want to talk a little bit
plotters.
about that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when I first moved to London, I didn't know anybody. I kept rocking up to this Theatre Delicatessens building just because I had nothing else to do. And I decided to start something called Creative Chitty Chatty, which everybody hates the name, but it did the job.
I like
so,
it.
yeah. Alliteration. What's
Absolutely.
not to like?
Who loves it?
Yeah. So we it was about 3 years ago. We used to meet. I think I made us meet every 2 weeks or something like that. We were all sitting together anyway. I just made it more formal to run through ideas and projects that we were working on to get feedback.
Yeah.
And we decided last year to bring it back and make it more formal and a really a launching point, or not a launching point, just a book club, as I'm not allowed to say either because it's not cool, but a book club for our immersive group to meet. We ask a question every single week, a framing, or month, even not week. We ask a question that
So it's
drives
like a debate
conversation.
club,
Yeah,
a book club.
a debate club.
An immersive debate club.
Yeah, there you go. That sounds cool, right? But yeah, so we send out a framing question and discuss it, and the idea is that it's a space where we can continue to grow ourselves as artists and also ourselves as an industry, and figuring out fun ways to move forward, such as the documentation that we talked about, or
Absolutely.
yeah,
And sustainable models. I mean,
Yeah.
I am not London-based, which has actually proven to be a nightmare trying to make immersive and interactive and one-on-one kind of work.
Yeah.
And I'm really struggling with finding a way to access a decent audience in Portsmouth, and also a way to make it sustainable outside of the funding bodies, because unless it has very particular criteria, it's not going to get arts council funding either. So it's great to know that the community are thinking about those sustainable models and are sharing practice, because quite often theatre can be really secretive when it comes to those sorts of things, the things that actually matter and the things that need to be passed on in order to keep going.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think
it's
we
good
went
to
through a
hear that.
phase where some of us were just at the brink of the next level.
Yeah.
And so it got a bit like that, and then we all looked around and went, no, what made us great and what made Heist great and all of these things was this sense of community and the fact that if shit hit the fan, excuse my language, but if things got rough, then we knew that you could ring someone and they would immediately jump in and help with the last get-in. And for instance, last night, 2 nights ago, I was doing cutting at 11 o'clock at night. John Cooper from Difference Engine just happened to be walking out of his office, and I'm there cutting fabric. And I didn't even ask. I was like, I'll see you later. And he's like, oh no, I'm not leaving till you're done. And just stayed and helped me do all of that kind of stuff. And it's just this kind of sense of community. We got the Mystery at the Museum thing because it was a commission that Difference Engine got that they thought, or not a commission, a proposal, and they thought this suits your work better.
Right.
So here you go. And it's really lovely to have that kind of
And we all benefit from
community.
that kind of, because like you said, everyone makes such different work anyway, and we're all doing quite different things, but it's so lovely to have that kind of connection and to have that community.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really great model just in itself moving forward in terms of legacy, because there is that sharing and because there is that passing of knowledge amongst the community, and I think that's so great, and that is really. And I've been to, we had an event, when was that last week or the week before?
2 weeks ago, I think.
It was only 2 weeks ago, and I thought that was fabulous, and I couldn't believe how many people
Neither could I.
came, and I couldn't believe the people I bumped into as well in terms of academics as well, who were there too, who'd heard about it from someone and from someone from someone, and I was just like, this is amazing. It's incredible to see all these people in one room who share.
Yeah, we tried to
this
get,
interest.
so it's got a core group of about 12 of us.
Yeah.
And when I pick the framing question, I then try to invite a few other people who will add a different perspective to that question.
Great.
And help drive the conversation in a different way. It's really lovely because we don't just have theatre makers. We've got producers, we've got random venue people who come in.
Great.
And it's just all about the perspective and moving it, us, and as an industry forward, and figuring out how to make it work, really.
And it's so incestuous. That's what I'm finding out more and more. The more and more people I talk to, the more and more it's so obvious where these things have come out of, and these kind of little incestuous sort of like relationships and links, and I don't mean personal relationships, but spaces and practices, but it is all very much linked, and in terms of thinking as a cultural historian in some respects, it's so interesting to see the way that culturally those practices have become manifest and where they've kind of come from, which is really exciting. And it's so good that you've kind of organised this and started to get something like that together, because I think it shows a really forward thinking and an open kind of attitude, which I think is really exciting. And hopefully I'll be coming to talk to you guys soon.
Yes,
so you'll hopefully be hearing from the Gunpowder Plotters, which is very exciting. Well, I won't keep you for much longer because I know you're opening tonight and you've probably got wood to cut, fabric to do.
Yeah, hopefully none of that. Oh God, I hope not.
Or at least delegating.
Yes, delegating. Lots of delegating.
Lots of delegating people to get things done. And we have to rush off to the Collab factory very shortly. So hectic day. So thank you so much for spending time with us. If you want to know anything about everyone I've spoken to today, the best thing to do is to go to your website, am I right?
Yeah.
Do you want to give your website address?
Our website is www.specifiq.co.uk. No, .com.
Is it .com or .co.uk?
Oh, that's a really good question. We're going to have to check that and edit that bit out.
You can Google.
That's how dead my brain is. I think it's .co.uk.
I think it might be. I know ours is. I always forget.
I'm pretty sure it's
.com
.co.uk.
or .org.
.co.uk. That would be www.specifiq.co.uk, and that's specific spelt with a Q, not a C.
Thank you very much. Well, I shall let you get on with tonight.
And
hopefully, even though you won't catch it here at the Vaults Festival, it sounds like you might have a chance to catch it in the summer. So if you are listening, keep an eye on the website and you'll be able to find out if you can come and catch the devil beneath. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed that birthday episode. As ever, do share, tweet, Facebook me, or get in touch with me via my website, which is www.joannabucknell.co.uk, and that's Joanna with an A and Bucknell with an A. I really love to hear from everybody who's listening, whether you just want to get in touch to say hello and tell me where you're listening from, or if you want to ask me a question. I really do love to hear from everybody. Over April and May, I'm going to be producing a few more extra sodes, so do make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of that extra content. So to keep in touch, get on the website and find out about any news. And if you want to make sure you catch all of the extra episodes, then make sure that you're subscribed. So until next month, bye-bye.